Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Poetry Mondays. For you guys today, we have an exciting difference. So Shrikant will be providing us with a featured poem today. It's going to be a little bit longer than usual, but it's going to be so worth it. It's going to be a Marathi poem. And with that, I give it over to Shrikant.
So Maritza, I went to India for 2 weeks. And my favorite thing about it was spending those 2 weeks with my parents. And normally when I come back, I used to get all kinds of goodies to eat. That was my normal practice. This time, I got back this poem. It is the most important thing I got back. So that's what I want to share with you. So folks, this is a Marathi poem. And I have been looking at metaphors and how metaphors work. So I'm going to be talking about how metaphors work in this poem. And because the context is so unfamiliar and the language is so unfamiliar, I'm hoping that I end up communicating something about metaphors. And maybe it will jog your memories about how metaphors actually work in English. Because we take a lot of these things for granted because they become part of us and we don't even notice them. So let's start. And by metaphor, I mean something very large. It's very simple idea. The idea that you're using something that is familiar in order to refer to something that is not so familiar, which you're using. So you're using this first one to talk about the second one. Okay, so that's what a metaphor is. Something familiar used to talk about something unfamiliar. And in order to make things really interesting, I've taken something which is the hardest to do. This is a metaphor for God, understanding God using a feather. Okay, so this is a feather being used to understand God. That's what this poem is about. It's a peacock feather, and the God is Krishna. So let me jump right in. This is the Marathi first line. Azuna taralte drushti pudati te morase pisanire. Okay. So what she's saying is that there is this peacock feather. Now, for people who do not have not seen the peacock feather, it is an incredibly beautiful feather. It is bluish, but it is iridescent. You change the angle, it shows you green and purple and red, and it's just beautiful. Okay. Now, Krishna, his complexion is blue. So on one hand, it's simply saying that this is like Krishna because he's blue. Now, the way in which metaphors work is that there is a metaphor. Metaphor is the tool that you know well. In this case, it's the peacock feather that you're holding in your hand, okay? And then there is metaphor, that is what you're trying to understand using it. That is Krishna this time, okay? So that is metaphor and metaphor. So he's saying that she's talking in this line only about the feather. She's saying, Azuna taralte drushti purati. And what she's saying is that still this feather hovers in the front of my eye. So what happens is that if you see a bright light and close your eyes, you can still see it. Similarly, something which is incredibly beautiful, if you see it and then close your eyes, you still see it in your mind's eye. So she's saying that just like when you're seeing something beautiful, it remains in front of your eyes like a light. So again, see how the metaphors are working. The metaphor here is sight. And she's pointing that, moving that to mind, of saying, just like when you love something, Even when, if you love a person and they're gone, you still have them in your mind. That's what she's saying. Okay, so she's using the feather, the sight of the feather, then moving from Krishna to your holding Krishna in your mind. Zira Meratya, this is the second line. Zira Meratya, Rangatse Garuda, Azunamala, Purate Nakare. Okay, now this is beautiful. Zira Meratya means shimmering. Ranga is color. Garuda is enchantment. Okay, so what she's saying is there is this enchantment of shimmering colors. Okay, that's what you actually see when you see a peacock feather. But look at each of these concepts and what they are referring to. The color is different aspects of Krishna. They're shimmering in the sense that you think you've gotten it, but then you see something else. You see all these different aspects of him, just like you see. And Garuda means enchantment. You are enchanted by this. You say, wow, it's like this. Oh, wait a minute, it's also like this. Oh, I see this also, this color. So that's what's happening to you. That is what is happening to you when you're seeing the feather. The same thing is happening to you when you're seeing Krishna. Azunamala Purate Nakare. I still do not fully grasp. See, this is the result that you get. Like when you see something very deep, like God, and you're seeing different aspects of it, no matter how enchanted you are with him, with God, with Krishna, you can't quite grasp the whole nature of it because there is so much dynamism to it. In a sense, it's just a feather, okay? But it is producing this entire dance of light and change, and your mind is enchanted by it and still cannot grasp it. It engenders curiosity and a sense of wonder. That's what she's capturing. Okay, see how much is being captured just by the peacock feather. Okay, so this is the core metaphor. Now she's going to describe different parts of Krishna and then show these different aspects. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you what Krishna, now she begins to describe Krishna. Okay, and then she's at the end, she's going to bring back the feather. Okay, now she's talking about Krishna. Ti murali ti tudumba yamuna kadamba fulale kati. Kharatsa ka hota tithala Gokul sa rahivasi. So what she's saying is that Gokul is the place where Krishna grew up. And she's describing it very simply with three things. The river Yamuna overflowing, a beautiful tree full of flowers, and the sound of the flute that Krishna used to play. That's his favorite instrument. Was he actually here? She's asking in wonder that was this God actually manifested here on earth? Navala paricha lila tyacha bhasasato hotaka. So lila is play. So she's saying Navala pari, that means ever new play. She's looking at nature, God, as a play of God. It's the Tao manifesting itself, playing with delight, creating all kinds of new things all the time. Tya avinashi mulapanase rahasya Rahasya purate na kare. So she's saying that eternal childhood, I do not know the secret of that eternal childhood, eternal creation that will keep on creating new things, new plays. So this is a way of describing what Krishna is doing throughout his life. Now she goes into how he deals with different people. Totara hota gopa sakhaki taruna priyakara hota. He was a childhood friend. He was a youthful lover. Dhita kiti to lokapriya kiti nitya agrani hota. He was bold. He was loved by all and was leader. Madhuvachani to Murali Manohara Rupavanta Velhara. With beautiful speech, with music produced by the flute. He was very handsome, captivating person. Samayadnyato Chatura Zanata Shatrunjaya Karika. Having tremendous presence of mind and cleverness and deep knowledge, he defeated his enemies easily. Tya nita nutana shatarupase rahasya purate na kare. Saying he assumes so many different roles, so many different forms, and does them so well that this ever new thousands of shapes that he took, manifestations that he took, she can't figure out the secret of it. To bandhu to pati pita to paramamitra to raja. He was a brother, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a best friend, he was a king. To drashta upadeshaka preraka ashrayato sakalansa. He was a visionary, advisor, inspirer, and a refuge to all. Sarvansati sarudaya tarito taraptya palikadala. Sarvansati sarudaya. Sarudaya is empathy. He had empathy for all. But now again, I want to point out metaphors being used here. Sarudaya, Rudaya is heart. Sarudaya means the same heart. So the word for empathy is to have the same heart in Marathi. So it is using the heart and commonality of heart as the word for empathy. So you can see how metaphor is being used to refer to something which is in consciousness, like empathy. So though he had empathy, he was beyond people. Alipta, again, alipta is a beautiful word. Alipta means non-attached, but lipta means to lose itself. Alipta means not losing itself. So it's like he's doing things, he's interacting with people, but he's not losing his own being while interacting with people. He's not attached. It's a very beautiful way of capturing non-attachment, that you're actually being in water, but you're away from water at the same time. You maintain your identity while interacting. That's what alipta is. Alipta savada nirmama sakshi sagaya sukha dukhansa. That he was this separate, independent, attentive, without ego, witnessing all the joys and pain of others. Sarvamanavi natyana atisundara keletyani. He just made all human relations beautiful by showing what human relations can be. Ayushala अर्थ दिला रसभरल्या चैतन्याने. He gave meaning to life by filling it with overflowing life force and consciousness. काय म्हणावे, काय नेमके द्यावे त्याला नाव. What can we name? What can I name such a person? गूढ निळ्या त्या अस्तित्वाचे रहस्यही पुरते न कळे. I cannot figure out. Nila is again blue. She's coming back to the feather. She's saying, I cannot grasp this mystery of this blueness of this feather. Okay, so she comes back. Okay, so you can see how it is being done. So you have start with the feather, you see certain things about it, then you expand out the nature of Krishna, and then you bring it back to the feather. Now, if you want to go one step further, with Indian philosophy, Krishna is the world. So she's used the feather to talk about Krishna. Now, Krishna is your metaphor. Now, he is the tool. She's saying the world is like that. The world has all these shimmering different aspects that interact with one another. And you have the kind of awe of the world, curiosity about the world. You're trying to figure out the world. And your mind is completely enthralled by it. And it floats in your mind all the time. So she's now using Krishna as a metaphor and world as a metaphor. If you want to go further, the core idea of Indian philosophy is Tattvamasi. You are that. You are Krishna. So this is what you can be. This is your ideal. This is what you're aiming at. So now Krishna is being used as a tool for understanding your present, your consciousness. So you can see it moves from the feather to Krishna, from Krishna to world, and then from Krishna to you. This, I thought, was a great example of really powerful metaphors that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, Shikat, can you do us a favor? Can you read the poem once through?
Sure.
Entirely?
Sure. अजून तरळते दृष्टी पुढते ते मोराचे पीस निळे झिळमिळ त्या रंगाचे गारुड अजून मला पुरते न कळे ती मुरली ती तुडुंब यमुना कदंब फुलले काठी खराच का तो होता तिथला गोकुळचा रहिवासी खरीच होती राधा अन तो रास खरा होता का नवलपरीच्या लीला त्याचा भासच तो होता का त्या अविनाशी मूलपणाचे रहस्यही पुरते न कळे तो तर होता गोपसखा की तरुण प्रियकर होता धीट किती तो लोकप्रिय किती नित्य अग्रणी होता मधुवचनी तो मुरली मनोहर रूपवंत वेल्हाळ समयज्ञ तो चतुर जाणता शत्रुंजय कळीकाळ त्या नीत नतून शतरूपाचे रहस्य पुरते न कळे तो बंधू तो पिता पती तो परम मित्र तो राजा तो द्रष्टा उपदेशक प्रेरक आश्रय तो सकलांचा सर्वांसाठी सहृदयते तरीही तो तरते त्या पलीकडचा अलिप्त सावध निर्मम साक्षी सगळ्या सुखदुःखांचा अपूर्व त्या जीवन योगाचे रहस्यही पुरते न कळे सर्व मानवी नात्यांना अतिसुंदर केले त्याने आयुष्याला अर्थ दिला रस भरल्या चैतन्याने काय म्हणावे काय नेमके द्यावे त्याला नाव काळाचा होता का स्वामी तो होता का देव गूढ निरात्या अस्तित्वाचे रहस्य ही पुरते न कळे अजूनही तरळते दृष्टी पुढती ते मोराचे पिस निळे.
Thank you. It's lovely. I find that even if one does not know the language, one knows that it is poem. It's lovely. Thank you. That's great. So, okay, folks. Well, I don't know, but that was the featured poem today. I invite anyone who wishes to read out their favorite poem, a poem of their own. Go ahead and type an exclamation in the chat, and we will call on you. You can read a poem. Everyone's going to be very shy to go after Shrikant. Go ahead, Paul.
I want to go after Shrikant because
Fantastic.
up till the moment you read Shrikant, I had been working on this one poem and it was like, I didn't like it. And but then when you read, I went back to the first draft of this poem where it says things that are so relevant, but in kind of a stream of consciousness. That my problem with poetry is when I try to refine it and get the meaning really honed, like you talked about with this poem, it loses its natural self. So because of what you read, I went back to my raw material. This was mostly stream of consciousness because it sort of has to be read now that you read that, or I feel a need to read it. So I will. Okay. And please, there's historical inaccuracies and things I tried to fix later, but just go with the flow. Okay. If I could, I would let things be what they are. Volcanoes, water lilies, the Indian Ocean, vintage cars. But as the concrete flickers into the abstract, and before I can catch it in the act, I am elaborating on the molten lava of memory, flowing through Monet's garden, dissolving the beauty into something I falsely claim is even closer to the form. And so, even if I had something as self-explanatory as a 73 Firebird with yellow licks of pure passion on each side, I would destroy its essence by mystifying my readers with metaphorical transmogrification. And so, beware, reader. I can turn the Great Barrier Reef into a web of death and rebirth, ruled by Kali and a school of serpents. I see through a prism, a constantly spinning mind lens, and I can only report what flashes by. Only impressions from the prism eye. I lost the other 5 senses in my 5th year in an unfortunate encounter with language. Since then, I can't let anything show its pure, unnamed innocence. For fear I will go blind. If I could, I would give you volcanoes, water lilies, the Indian Ocean, vintage cars, but I cannot. So quiet now, let's listen. That's my poem, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you, Paul. That was lovely. Next up, Joe.
Yes, I'm going to read a poem called The Well of Grief. Those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the well of grief, turning down through its black water to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink, the secret water cold and clear, nor find in it the darkness glimmering, the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else. Decided to read this one primarily because it was actually, we had done a meetup not too long ago at the Thinking Society on hope. And this idea of wishing for things to be different than they actually were. And people throw coins into a well, often with that same intent. as opposed to maybe embracing what is. So I thought that that was an interesting poem that I had come across that I just thought about.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Brian.
Okay, this is about it's a poem about something that happened in a city I frequently worked in many years ago. La Belle Cathédrale, Église de Paris. 3 times I visited this beautiful building, but never whilst I lived there. I have photographs pregnant with memories of you standing outside the doors on a rich, romantic weekend. I think of the history, never the cost. I agree that with this, the whole world has lost something rare and beautiful and spiritual. Not that I call myself a Catholic or even a Christian these days, but I know of the bonds found in culture. Duality for me links us in our very own ways. We walk around the streets, seemed like forever. I bought you a souvenir for 10 francs. Please, let them build it back together. And that was a poem about a visit to Paris after the cathedral burnt. And it was just a very emotional time for me. And at that stage, we thought that most of the cathedral might be destroyed, but it wasn't, and it's back. So that was it.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks. Next up, I have Marco.
This is called After Us by Connie Wanek. Rain is falling through the roof, and all that prospered under the sun, the books that opened in the morning and closed at night, and all day turned their pages to the light. The sketches of boats and strong forearms, and clever faces, and of fields and barns, and of a bowl of eggs, and lying across the piano, the silver stick of a flute, everything invented and imagined, everything whispered and sung, all silenced by cold rain. The sky is the color of gravestones, the rain tastes like salt and rises in the streets like a ruinous tide. We spoke of millions of billions of years, we talked and talked. Then a drop of rain fell into the sound hole of the guitar, another onto the unmade bed, and after us the rain will cease, or it will go on falling even upon itself. Yeah, I just like the I guess it just shows like the fleetingness of like humankind, like compared to like the billions of years, the minuteness of humankind, like within the millions and billions of years, and sort of how just nature like always remains constant is the only thing that really remains constant.
That's great. Thank you. Would anyone else like to read their poem or a favorite poem today? Let's see. I'm going to be very literal for a moment then. See if anyone else gets the courage to see if they would like to share a poem. I'm going to share with you guys. So Federico Garcia Lorca is a poet that's, I've read quite a bit of his poetry, and he actually has a poem called, it's El Gitano de las Metaforas, and it's the gypsy of metaphors is the poem. So I'm going to be slightly literal, Shrikant, and provide you guys with this poem. Now, I had not yet pulled up the English version, so I apologize. Well, I'm going to give it to you in Spanish, and I can do a quick translation. It's right. I was hoping to find the English, but I didn't. I was unable to find the English poem for you. So apologies, you'll have to deal with my translation, which is not going to be probably as good. So here you go. So he used, he was trying to, he was doing kind of similar to, well, not, it's not the religious aspect, but he was dealing with the concept of the metaphors. So, okay, so cobra amarilla, su carne, huele a caballo y a sombra. Yunque humado sus pechos, gimen canciones redondas, versos que congregan las imágenes de visto, odio, olfato, tacto y gusto que tanto proclamó el poeta del canto gitano. Así como Góngora narró en sus romances al escribir, 10 años vivió Belerma y el corazón difunto que él dijo en testamento, aquel francés boquirrubio, contenta vivió con él, aunque a mí me dijo alguno que viviera más contenta con 300,000 de juro. Contó otras penas y alegrías, Federico Garcia Lorca. Por una verdadera venía don Pedro. Ay, cómo lloraba el caballero, montado en un ágil caballo sin freno. Venía en la busca del pan y del beso. So he's doing a play on, so what he's describing, he's speaking of himself, and it's almost like tongue-in-cheek, but he's alluding to the fact of so Gitano is gypsy, and it's gypsy have a known, it's a known subculture within Spanish culture and other cultures for being like the women there are like considered heartbreakers because they don't ever stay. So it's like, you know, you're here, you're a whirlwind, and they're so different. So that's what the poem is saying. He's talking of, you know, like he's talking in the beginning, it's like cobra amarilla, it's like yellow snake. You know, the skin smells like sun and like horses, and sun and horses is supposed to be like the best smell, right? So he never speaks of love or of an actual woman. So he's using like all these things, and he's kind of talking about how this, you know, life is more vivid, as it were, in speaking of this thing, you know. And he says, and he speaks of how himself, like, you know, poet. So he's a poet. So he says versos are verses, so lines of poetry. You know, he says they congregate as full images in the vision, in the vista, in the eye. And he says, and oído, and you know, tacto is tactile, and gusto is taste. And he says, and it's so strong that I proclaim this, you know, this poet proclaims a song for the gitana, for the gitano. So it's and he's just talking, it's funny because he never actually says like gypsy woman. So, but it's the whole entirety of the poem is like a almost tongue-in-cheek, everything is metaphor. So that's why I thought of that one, and I thought I would bring it up. And actually, Shrikant, I find myself, what you just said, it's near impossible to do a direct translation because the entire poem is, when you're reading it in Spanish, you know that, you know, when he's talking about this thing, the snake or the, you know, berelma, that's not an actual thing that I can say it's this word in English. It's like, it's near impossible to translate this poem word for word. You can only give the gist and the story because it's so very much like full of metaphors. So this one came to mind when you're reading your poem, because I was wondering if it was the same. And it's funny because in yours, I could hear when you read the whole thing, also you could see like the pieces that went together. And it was really cool because I could hear some words you explained for us. When you hear them repeat, you're like, oh, and it's changing, and this is what she's going back to. So that was actually super cool. And it's brings to me the just the concept of, you know, art and poetry transcending language. Because I feel like, you know, you didn't have to know what you were reading in order to understand that you're reading a piece of art. And I think that's true of so many of the poems that we share with each other here today. So yes, I just want to share that. I will give you guys, you folks, one more time. If anyone has a poem they would like to read, go ahead and type in an exclamation in the chat here. If not, what we're going to do is we'll go on to the second section of our evening, the collaborative poem. What do you think, Shrikant? Should we stay all of us together? Or do we break it up again? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have enough to have 2 small groups.
Sure. Do you want me to do this, or do you want to do this?
I'm sorry, say again.
Okay, I'll go ahead and divide. You'll have to pick a leader for the second group.
Right, yes. So I'm taking volunteers. We spoke about this last week. Does anybody think that they might feel up to the challenge to attempting? Paul's laughing. I'm looking at Paul. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Not yet. No worries. He'll get there. No rush. It's okay. Any chance you might want to play moderator, Brian? I'm picking on people now. Feel free to say no.
Okay. How about may I do that?
Brian, I'm muted. 1 second. I didn't hear what he said. I was hoping it was a yes.
I say thank you for the offer, but I will have to refuse this.
No worries. No
In
worries.
which case, I'll do it.
You will. Fantastic. All right.
Okay.
Great.
Just a second. Okay, hold on. Let me just give me a second. Let me set it up. Give me just a minute here.
No worries. No worries. I have, yeah.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's do it. Starting the breakout rooms. How much? So 20 minutes.
Give 25.
Okay, so
30 because you need 20 minutes for the
minutes
making lines and
right. Total 30 minutes.
yes.
Okay, perfect. Starting the rooms
Is there
now.
a theme? Is there a theme?
Metaphors.
Metaphor.
Oh, sorry, metaphors.
Metaphors. We're going to be talking about
You
metaphors.
forgot.
All right, let's give me just a second here. All right. Opening up all the rooms.
Looks like yes. Yep, it looks. Are you missing anyone from your group?
No, anybody who's the breakout rooms are closed, so this is it.
All right, then I guess we got everyone. Everyone from my group is back. All right, would you like to go first, Shrikant?
Okay, I will.
Put the new guy on the spotlight.
Let me go ahead and read out. I'm really curious. Joe, can you share the document? Okay, and can you make it a little bit larger? Okay, perfect. Metaphors as dancing lights. What are metaphors? What is a metaphor? Describe a metaphor. I don't know if I thought in that way before. I usually dance around the questions. Sometimes the questions dance around you. Life is a tango. I thought you said tangled. Life is tangled. The trick is to tango without getting tangled. But we always seem to get twisted. The problem is that we use real feet. I like to unravel, but I know I enjoy unrolling. Don't ask questions, just keep moving. Keep dancing, feet or no feet. Metaphors are like light. Don't look too closely. Metaphors light up things you don't know. They bring the conscious to the unconscious. At times, enjoying a moment, at times enjoying a constant. What a great light show is a dance of metaphors. I enjoy my light bulbs like a light show. Can I also let go and embrace the unlikely couplings? A troupe of metaphors dances around the great unknown, shining their flashlights, looking to confront their shadows. Crisscrossing shadows make a beautiful pattern, transcending clumsy footsteps. How will you dance with metaphors?
I saw the roll, didn't see the rock.
Maritza, you're muted.
I forgot I was still muted. So what I usually do for the new moderators, I ask for a copy of the poem along with your co-poets, just to ensure that I can throw it up in the hyperbook when I create it. Well, I don't throw it up there, I lie. You know, Shrikant, you're muted.
Joe, could you send it to Maritza?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, you're muted now.
Via email or just?
No, you could just throw it on here and I'll grab it. You actually, that one might be too long. Yeah, send it to me via email. That's fine. Okay, so let me read for you the poem of the second group. I can do the same. I can do the share screen. Okay. All right. So we called ours Mess of Meta. Meanings, etymological tricks, and plain hokey over reality. Muddled, elusive, tattered, and possibly half ornery rainbows. A rose is a rose is a rose, they say. What then is a Meta 5? It once was my bedroom. Now it's my prison. Are you saying I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer? I once was happy as a kid with a new toy. How can a clam be happy? What is spin but your life's metaphor, as doctored by you? My world ended when you stopped spinning. My rose was plastic and faded and hologram at the end. What was it, metaphor or just a lie? Ending the world is the same as failing to spin. How should our art be? Mixed and tumbled metaphors, announced assonances, littering alliterations, hither and thither. Collaborative poetry is a race you cannot lose. So I had a lot of fun with this poem today, Shrikant. I hope you guys did as well.
Yeah, I was doing this for the first time, and I really enjoyed doing this because I think the way it worked was that Paul threw two concepts at the table. One was a dance, and then second was light. And then we just kind of took off from there, and we were doing this and that with it, and it kind of came together, I think, pretty well.
Always, it's always almost shocking how you're like, there's no way we're gonna make this a poem, guys. And it does, right? So I liked, there's so many aspects. For me, the most poignant was the almost underlying fear that we've overdone the metaphor and we are now out of metaphor and into evasion or lie territory. That was the sense I got, this cautionary tale of, if all of your life is a metaphor, are you still talking in metaphors, or are you now just living a lie? That's kind of, what I got the undercurrent of what was coming out for us, and also the and I don't think I got all of them, but I think that there a lot of the lines comprised in the poem with my group are plays on some like standard Americanisms that are standard metaphors we use. And I think we use them to the point that we may forget in the conscious thinking that it is metaphor and not literal. So I saw some of that there as well. They were both kind of wistful poems, Shrikant. Did you find that you thought your group's poem came out a little wistful sounding?
I don't think so. I mean, that's not the feeling that I got from the poem. It was kind of, there is with the dance and the light and the shadows and problems with dance, with feet entangling and all kinds of things. But just there is a rhythm to it where you say, okay, yes, you're going to have problems, but you just keep going. So I didn't feel that at all. I think the feeling of our group's poem is very different than your group's.
Definitely, ours was more direct, as it were. This group. Would anyone else like to comment on the process, on the writing process? How was this for you? Did anything specifically, any of the lines specifically speak to you? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear what people were thinking about the poem, about previous poems read today, about the theme. Go ahead and type the exclamation mark. Go ahead, Shrikant.
I want to ask people about what they thought of, what they think of metaphors. What, like when they think of metaphors, what is it that comes to their mind? How do they think of metaphors? What are they? What are their uses? Just any thoughts?
I have Joe next up.
I mean, I think that they're extremely powerful, but they are limited. It's analogical thinking that allows you to make connections between two different areas, which is incredibly powerful when you're talking about coming up with a new idea or concept. We've seen this a lot with Carl Jung, with the alchemy process and how to connect different disciplines. And I think that even if you think of things like The Blind Watchmaker, with I forget what his last name was, Paley, that came up with how intricate the human body is, or humanity is. So that, and I think that was also used by what was the Dawkins in his approach to explaining some of his theories. So I mean, there's a lot of power. There's a lot of I don't know, power behind using metaphors in order to come up with new ideas and express new thoughts.
Thank you, Joe. Next up, I have Paul.
Yeah, I think the poems, one thing that I thought they might have in common was they had some questioning at the end. In ours, there was just the one last question, but yours, I think, in the last few lines, you posed some questions. So they were sort of an inquiry into metaphor, in a way, both of them. That was one thing I thought they had in common. But in as far as your point, Maritza, about the playing with the idea that maybe metaphors get so overused you don't know for a metaphor, the poem that I read of mine, when I read it again, I kind of decided to use it because I thought it was saying something that I didn't even quite know clearly I was saying when I wrote it, but it was that a metaphor is really like a groping attempt to describe something that you can't describe. So it's always a little short. It always fails in some way compared to the real thing. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure if your poem was getting at that, but that's in my mind about, we think of metaphor as a way to like describe something that can't be described in another way, but the metaphor is also inadequate. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. So that's my thoughts on
Well,
it.
that's interesting. You know, I in general, I tend to think of a metaphor as a way to describe something with more grace, as it were. Like, you know, if you, and this is me, perhaps, you know, but I'm thinking in general, the metaphor is the more lovely way to state the thing that is closer to reality, or the actual thing. Like, you know, you can say the sun hit the floor, but
Yeah.
that's nowhere near as lovely or beautiful as saying, you know, rays of shimmering embers danced upon the, you know, the tiles. It's you're saying the same thing, but the manner in which you say it, just like it gives metaphor. So, you know, we know that it's not really, you know, shimmering embers, and they're not actually dancing, but it's the same picture. You know, you see the sun hitting the floor. So I usually think of a metaphor a little bit that way.
I agree with that, but we can't express in words the experience of watching the sun hit the floor.
Yes.
So a metaphor is also inadequate. That's kind of what I'm
Mm,
trying to say.
that I would agree with. Yes, like the need to use shimmering embers instead of light hitting, because you don't want someone to think of light hitting the floor. You want them to feel the beauty of the light as it's shining in such a manner.
And even then you're simulating it, yeah.
Right. And then even though you're convinced that what you're feeling upon seeing this, you're not, there's no way you're going to be able to truly convey that to them. Yes, I agree. Thank you, Paul. Next up, I have Marco.
No, it was just like kind of similar what you guys were saying, with that you're just kind of like embody the metaphor, you know, you sort of like embody it. You can like feel it rather than just like, you know, it's not just a word on a piece of paper. Like, yeah.
Thank you, Marco. That's great. You know, there's something else that you mentioned, Paul, that I want to pick up on, the idea of questions, you know, the like questioning what is metaphor. I felt that a little bit in the way that the featured poem, the poem that Shrikant presented for us, it was inviting us to question those the metaphor a little bit in that poem, the way it was presented, but in a very positive, lovely way. We might have gone just a little bit more dark, but I think that was the you know, that just those embers were kind of started there. Next up, I have Anton. Go ahead, Anton.
Yeah, I think I mean, so it's interesting thinking about metaphor. So like from writing firsthand, and even like when doing collaborative writing. So like, I mean that both of that is firsthand, like by myself or with other people's firsthand. But so I'm conscious that I'm using metaphors, and I have an awareness that I'm using metaphors a lot of times. But I think you bring up a point, Maritza, when you were talking about, but do you ultimately lie to yourself? Because like that saying, the map is not the territory. That's what I was thinking of with part of what you were saying. So like, it's weird to have a consciousness that I'm describing the map, and I do think that I do get immersed in the map rather than thinking, and many times than the territory, but I feel like I bounce back and forth. I'm on the map, I'm on the territory, I'm on the map, I'm on the territory. And maybe that's just the way life is, I don't know. But for me though, even if it is possible, because I don't say that I agree for sure that people couldn't truly understand what your experience is when you communicated with metaphor. I kind of, I'm thinking about it as kind of like an alternative, a favorable alternative to maybe understanding what that person's firsthand experience is, or what the group, now that I think about it as a collaborative poem, firsthand experiences. Like, I don't see it as necessarily disappointing unless you struggle with word. Like, I mean, I guess in a way I feel fortunate enough that words that I use or words that I hear have a certain beauty to them that is good enough in a way. Even if it's not exact, it's good enough. And good enough kind of diminishes it, but that's why I laugh. But you know, I don't know.
That's an interesting thought. Could a metaphor be something we're using for good enough? That's almost a more stark way of presenting what Paul was saying, that we fail to quite convey what we're trying to convey. Maybe?
I guess, oh, here's a good way of putting it. If I failed to convey it, or if another person or group of people that I'm listening to in this context fails to convey it, I think that I know it. So maybe I'm mistaken in thinking that I know it or understand it, or that I can communicate it. But I mean, there's something beautiful at its epitome, like something enjoyable, but at the epitome, there's something beautiful about how words can be used. Like, that's kind of a beauty in and of itself. I don't know if I'm adding, a completely different thought and throwing that in there, but that's kind of partly what I'm saying, though. Yeah.
Thank you. That gives me something to think on. Thanks. Sorry, Shrikant, you're next.
I think, for me, it is Julian James who has done really the most amazing work on metaphors. And I think metaphors are most interesting when they come to concepts of consciousness. So let's look at map and territory. Like when the territory that you're exploring is outside, you have a direct reference to it. How do you map the territory of your consciousness? And what is involved in doing that? And I think metaphor's role in that is indispensable, that you really need, like, again, it's like the couple of examples that I gave of saying, like, the sarudhay, like, of the same heart, as a way of transferring, you can actually visualize two hearts outside and say, okay, this is the same, and then kind of move it inside in the consciousness. So his whole point is that all kind of concepts of consciousness developed later, and they're all based on metaphor. And what you're getting is that, and it's the similar point to what Paul is making, that about experience, or kind of consciousness of something. How are you going to describe that to another human being? Because that's happening inside you. And I think metaphors is the middle term. They're saying, okay, this, what I'm going on here is like this. And you see this, then try to map it back to what, and try to map it into your consciousness and see that this is something that is analogous. So I think that's really for me, that's the most interesting part of metaphors.
Awesome. That, I can see that, definitely. Thank you. Next up, I have Brian.
I was just going to share the comment that most people, when they're using metaphors, are quite limited in the scope of what they use. If you really want to understand metaphors, read some of the great writers. I mean, Shakespeare comes to mind immediately, but many of the others, I can't remember the names offhand, but most really good writers are experts in the use of metaphor. So yeah, that was it.
Thanks, Brian. I would agree with that. I would second that. I think some of the greats are the ones who can do it, and in such a, it's almost subtle in that it just creates this mastery of word and sound. Joe, go ahead.
No, I think actually Shrikant that was a very, very deep point that you were making. That it actually allows us to be aware of oneself. The metaphors is that the minute that we can start to come up with a visualization of like what somebody else is kind of going through, and then we can kind of understand our own personal self in that process. And actually, in a way, that it also links to things like how we relate to one another as well, through our emotions with each other. But that's a very, very deep. I've not thought about it in terms like that. I know we've covered Julian James here in the past, but that was a very, very clear description as to how we can actually understand ourselves in that process.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Paul, go ahead.
I agree with all these comments very much. And Brian's comment about the brilliance of the metaphor of these great writers. And then, isn't it amazing that a person like Robert Frost can just get at human experience, sometimes with zero metaphor? Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. I don't think there's a single metaphor in that poem, and it captures what we're talking about. So isn't that remarkable? That's my only point.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Next up, I have Anton.
It's I have a realization, but I wonder if I'm going to put this into words and it's going to make sense. I'll say the part that I think makes sense, and a part of it I don't know if it will. The part that makes sense to me is so, like, for example, it's a book. It could even be more than a book. That I've listened to certain people on podcasts talk about. I haven't read it myself, but The Warrior, The King, The Magician, and there's another one. But these are metaphors used to understand different aspects of yourself. And that metaphors can be used as a way of maybe it's just a good enough way, going back to the good enough, and like BLJ was mentioning in the chat, of understanding yourself. The part that I'm not sure whether or not this makes sense, but it's a realization I had recently, is it's like I realized that I realize things. Like, I already thought about this, so I'm just circling back to it, and then I go somewhere. It's like a spiral. If you were to visualize it, it's like a spiral. And it might even be an upward spiral, like, oh yeah, I realize that, then spiral up some more. Oh yeah, I really go back to something, spiral up some more. So that trying to use a metaphor to explain what I'm talking about. So yeah.
Thank you, Anton. Next up, Shrikant.
So Paul, that was a great observation about the poem, the Robert Frost poem. And actually I read it heard it just a couple of days ago. And the interesting thing about it is that I see it as a whole thing as a metaphor. He's describing to you a physical situation. But the reason you like the poem is not about that. It is about a certain sense of the world, of saying, almost like a metaphysical sense, saying that it's not about getting to the city. It is not about getting things done. There is a beauty to this world itself. And in this stopping of a place where you normally don't stop and experiencing the beauty of it in a physical way, she's actually pointing out it is the whole thing is a metaphor to point to a certain feeling about existence itself, the wondrousness of existence. And to me, that is the thing that comes through most powerfully without having to say anything, because the metaphor, that is the metaphor, which is the entire description, points to that. And that's why I love the poem. That's my take on it. What do you think, Paul?
Wow, I think it's a really cool way to think about it. I mean, it even highlights his genius more because it's a metaphor that, that is disguised. I mean, it doesn't look like it has any metaphorical language in it. So I love that way of thinking about it, Shrikant. Thank you. I have to just let it sink in.
Yeah, and see, what happens is that like most metaphors are like worn out coins. You know, people are passing them on so much that the actual value for those are lost. And then you're just treating them as tokens. You lose the meaning behind it. The beauty of poems like this is that these are freshly coined metaphors so that they will actually make you feel a certain way. The other part of it is that most of the metaphors that we have are built into the language itself. Like, for example, the example I gave of Sarudai. Sarudai is a word in Marathi that means empathy. So it's like when you think of that, but because I know the roots and because I know the history of the word, I can trace them back into metaphors. I mean, my English is not as good as my Marathi, where I can't trace every word, the history of every word. Like I have to go to Oxford English Dictionary to find out, oh, you know what, this is the word, how it was used first. These are the roots, how it came to be. But when you actually follow back the stories of these individual words, they are really fascinating. They are really fascinating. We just use them off the cuff saying, oh, this is what it means. But there is, many times there is a lot of depth to it. Like Jung does this analysis with the words used in the Odyssey versus Iliad. And I think Brian McVeigh does the same analysis with New Testament and Old Testament. And they trace where these words came from. Like words like psyche, for example, actually referred to breath. And it got transformed from breathing into thinking slowly over time. So it's very fascinating to study these, histories of these words.
Go ahead, Paul.
Your points are making me think about haiku. Because now I'm going to reread haiku and say to myself, because haiku is also often completely concrete. You know, the flower blossomed with the spring or something like that. Like, but do you think of just literally a flower blossoming, or is that whole thing a metaphor? So it's an interesting new light on the whole concept. Thanks.
Go ahead, Shrikant.
I want to follow up on that. I was talking to Yasuhiko, who is originally Japanese, and he was making the point about the Japanese language. See, the Japanese language actually uses a lot of visual right brain things. So actually, a metaphor is a way of taking something from visual, like right brain, and converting it into something verbal, audio, in the left brain. So it's a way, and because the Japanese language is more like that, that is the way in which they will talk. That they will actually give you a set of concretes, and they're actually pointing to the meaning that is pointed to by all of those things.
funny. It's making me think now of other poems that I've had a similar thought to what Paul was saying. Like, this poem's fairly metaphor free, and now I'm going back going, but was it? Rethinking this all. Where is up? Go ahead, Anton.
Yeah. In fact, I see humor in that too, because like, I think for me, haikus have been easy to, maybe not all of them, but when I've heard haikus, it's been easy to take them literally. And I know they're supposed to be simple. I understand that. But yeah, I'm rethinking that too, like you said, Maritza. But like as far, oh, so yeah, in fact, I think that there's something great, at least when I think I can perceive it, of something that is deceptively simple, that appears to be deceptively simple. That's one of the things that I enjoy. So this doesn't have to just be in haiku. Not even just enjoy, I love about poetry, like thinking is, and there's different angles in which you can think about it. But you know, is this actually more clever than what I realize? It seems simple, but is it more clever than what I realize? Is it a metaphor for something, but it seems like it's literal? The collaborative poem that I did today, I was part of Shrikant's group. I thought it was pretty interesting that you, Maritza, were saying that you thought your group's poem was more direct, because to me, but you know, people can perceive things different ways. Our poem was direct in a way, kind of like what metaphors often are. They can seem direct, but they're also pointing to something that isn't. It kind of seemed like it was a dance between both worlds to me as I think about it. It's more than just dance and lights and feet, but you could read it as just dance and lights and feet, because it makes enough logical sense that you could just see it that way. So maybe that's what happens when I'm hearing a haiku or hearing certain other things that can have more depth to it than I realize. Those are some thoughts that I have.
Actually, you know, it's something it's a fun way to play with poetry if one is being more intentional in one's writing. It is quite, I don't know, at least for myself personally, I find it to be very satisfying to take something that is a very deeply felt emotional thing for me, and to put it on in a poem in a manner such that you have to, like, you get to the end, and when you're done, you're like, that was lovely. And you're like, wait a minute. And then you want to reread it again, and you realize that actually it's not as light as you're talking. It's like this depth of, you know, grief or depth of joy that is being portrayed. And it's almost like, you know, little tendrils of not quite what you realized it was. And by the time you realize what the metaphor is, it has its claws into you already. That's, I mean, it's something I like. And some of the poetry that speaks to me most tends to be poetry that does operate in that manner. And not just poetry. To Mahboob's point, he made a great comment in the chat that, you know, prose, there's a lot of prose that does this. It's not constrained just to metaphor. And I would take it even one step further. There's a lot of, like, writing in general. You know, we just recently, we spent a couple of weeks with Shrikant going through the 7 sermons for the dead with, and this is, you know, Carl Jung's writings. And certainly he's not a poet, but that small writing, the little group of writing, to me read almost like poetry. And I think when I say it reads like poetry, I'm starting to wonder here, you know, kind of turn things over with you guys, if what I'm really saying is I hear a pattern of metaphor that creates within my thought something that is, you know, it has that pleasant tone that to me signifies like a poetry or a work of art is what it is. So I tend to equate work of art with poetry. So, I will often use the word poetry itself as metaphor for art. And so I see that across like a large spectrum in many things in our life. One more thing I want to say, haiku is a fascinating thing to study because it really is there are amazing haikus that have a level of depth that a 4-page poem cannot reach. It is fascinating, but it's that same thing. It's where you have to read it more than once and it will sneak into you and it'll have you very firmly entrenched before you realize the depth of emotion that it's actually portraying. They're pretty interesting. Limericks are that way also. So limericks tend to be like funny. They're like very like jovial, and they seem to be silly, very much like more silly than haiku. But they also have a lot of the limericks, the original limericks were almost politic, in that the manner of delivery was purposefully metaphor for the current situation that was in the climate of wherever the poet was. So it's something also you can see that where artists use prose and specifically metaphor to allow them to make these bold statements without saying them directly. And sometimes I wonder if it's just for that simple plausible deniability, and I'm using shimmer and embers. I didn't say sun. You said I couldn't say sun, and I didn't. But everybody who reads that is like, you've entrenched the word sun into their heart by the manner in which you delivered it. Oh, wow. We're coming to the end here. Shrikant, you want to announce for us what goodies lie in store for us this week?
Yes,
with
I have
52
that.
Living Ideas?
I do want to ask Paul a question afterwards.
Go for it.
So what we have coming up is on Thursday, we are continuing with the Jung series, which has just been incredible. And this Thursday, we're going to do stages of man, stages of life, different stages, childhood, youth, middle age, and old age. He has some very profound things to do. Now, I've gotten hooked onto doing presentations on Jung. So this time I'm going to draw the whole chapter. So I'm going to actually do live drawing of the chapter. And I have conceptualized the chapter as a tree where I just hang all the points that he makes on the tree. And for the finale, I have the root of the tree where there is another thinker who has actually solved most of the problems that Jung brings up in all the problems of stages of man. And I'm going to show that. So it's really, really fascinating. So the lecture, the work of Jung itself is very fascinating. And I think what we are doing with it is really incredible. So don't miss that. That's on Thursdays at 9 p.m. On Wednesdays, I'm still trying to figure out, I'm going to come up with something on Wednesdays. And then we're doing the Gita meetups on Friday. And I'm going to add a Gita meetup so that we finish Gita meetup in a shorter time. That's what Yogeshwar would like to do. So I'm going to add that probably on Sunday nights. I'm going to add one more Gita meetup. So that's what is coming up. Now, Paul, I have been consuming a lot of poetry because I'm really fascinated with metaphors. So I'm seeing, and these poets, because they are not just using stock metaphors, they're actually creating their own metaphors. It is amazing. The two poets that I've been reading, I've been taking a lot more of is one is Gibran, Khalil Gibran, who is amazing. And then I'm also looking at Rumi. But Gibran, I think, captures how I'm thinking far more, far better than anybody else. I'm also, of course, reading many poets, but those are the two. Gibran is especially Gibran. So can you recommend to me other poets like Gibran? I mean, the thing I specifically like about Gibran is that he has an integrated view, like the consciousness. He doesn't look down upon the world. He doesn't look down upon the consciousness. He thinks greatness of spirit and greatness of work is the same. Greatness of in doing day-to-day life and greatness of having the most deepest spiritual insight is the same thing. There are very few people who hold that view, I think, but I don't know. I don't want to even make that statement. What poets you found who have done, like Tagore does that. Tagore does that very well. So Tagore, this guy, but whom else would you recommend?
There's only one that comes to mind, but it's like a current interest. I think I've read him here before, which is Hafiz. Hafiz. He's a Persian poet. He's like within 100 years of Rumi, but I'm trying to see when. Yeah, no, he lived after Rumi. And I don't know. I want to hear what you think after you look at him. But he's one of the most beloved poets of that region. He was a scholar, a scholar of the Quran. I think he memorized it, so he had this title that made him be special. And he brings spiritual concepts into daily life in a really big way. I'd be curious what you think. That's the one that comes immediately to mind.
Yeah, and the thing is that I've found, thanks to these meetups, I found that it's actually much better to listen to poetry.
Yeah. I agree.
Except that you need to find somebody who can actually read poetry. Most people don't know how to do it. So so I have to search through many YouTube videos to find somebody who can actually read it well, who can do it justice. So if you have anybody, any kind of YouTube versions of Hafiz that you would recommend, please send it to me.
I might be able to do that because this guy, Daniel Ladinsky, he's like the scholar who's been into him. And some people I think might object to his translations. And that's another problem I have, Shrikant, is like you have the original language for the poem you read, and I know how much I'm losing by reading this stuff in English. And Ladinsky tries to render it the best he can, but I still regret.
I have to tell you, I'm sorry, it's going to make you jealous, but Rumi, the Iranian and the Urdu language and the Hindi language, there is a lot of similarities. So I get good number of words, and I have some really great Indian classical musicians whom I love, who have done like musical renditions of me poetry, and I actually so it's really wonderful to be. But there is something to the original language. Now, Maritza, with your permission, I want to talk about one metaphor from Gibran, which I found particularly amazing. Let me see if I can find it. Give me just a second, okay? Let me see if this is the right one. Okay, it's coming up. Just a second. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get the poem. Hold on. It's a very short poem, but very powerful. Okay.
Which poem of his are you
Yes.
reading from?
You know what? Can you put it up on the? It's called Fear by Gibran, Khalil Gibran. Let me see if I can find it. Then I think it's very much worth reading.
In English?
Yes. And Paul, I'm going to bring it up. Let me see if I can bring it up.
I have it. Do you have it?
No, not yet. Go ahead, and if you could. And Paul, would you do the honors of reading it for us?
Sure, of course, if you'd like. Why not? Of course. Ooh, I like the first line. Okay. What is it called? I don't see a
It is
title.
called Fear.
Okay.
Can you
Fear.
make it slightly larger? Let me see.
Yeah, I can see it. I
You can see it? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled. From the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter, there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know. It's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. That is awesomely beautiful. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Shrikant.
Thank you.
Most of his poetry is like breathtaking. It
Yeah.
really is.
I love this, particularly in connection with what we've been talking, about, the Carl Jung's theme of the
Yeah.
outside and inside. And this actually speaks to the stages of man. This is like the river is basically your inside, and ocean is the whole world around. So when you, and I would add to the metaphor, I would say that, you are a river, and ocean is the world. And it's the evaporation of the ocean that actually got you started. So that there is an evaporation that is taking place, and then it rains. And that's how you start. So you are actually part of the ocean. But when you're a river, you don't realize that you are part of the ocean. When you reach there, then you say, oh yes, I am just part of the world. I am the world. That is very much of the Indian tradition of Brahma and Atma, and it's that same idea.
I don't think you'll get that same kind of beauty from Hafiz, but see what you think. It's a different kind of beauty that
Sure,
you
I
may
will
not.
try.
Yeah, I don't think you'll find it, but I shouldn't even predict. Forget I said that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is that different poets have different powers,
Yeah.
I've been reading many different poets, and each person actually brings some of their own soul to it, own way of expression to it, and you are stunned by it. So it's just amazing. All right, Maritza, back to you.
Well, I think that's a good note to end. This was fun. We're going to we've been trying to announce for you guys the next week's focus and theme a week in advance. We're still working out the kinks of that, but are we to do we have the one we're thinking for next week, Shrikant, or shall we wait and decide and post it?
Like, for example, we're going to do Jung on stages of life. That's one possibility. Or we're talking about culture. We can just take
we announced last week we told them we were going to do culture, and Yeah, but we did warn them that it was not set in stone.
Yes.
Stages of life, how do you make that one? I mean, stages of life itself could be the theme. That seems a little broad stroked, perhaps. Might be problematic, maybe a little too broad strokes.
Okay, so then how about going with culture?
Maybe.
Okay,
I'm not convinced culture is less broad stroked. As I was saying that critique in stages of life, I was like, that may also apply to culture. I am, so, you know, I have a slight bias because I really want to know what is in people's
how about this?
unconscious thoughts.
Let people type in what's in their unconscious in the chat.
Give to them the vote.
You become conscious of it.
Put it in chat.
Yes.
Votes. Stages of life or culture. This
Or
feels
you
like a
can- or you can
popularity
select
contest.
something else
I
and
never
put-
win those.
Or you can go ahead and put any other suggestion that you have. Let's just see what people have.
What do you guys want to be a focus and theme?
Stages. We got one stages. Stages.
Everybody else doesn't care.
No, we got two. That's good. Anybody else?
All right.
I can't make next week, unfortunately, so because I'm working.
He's not going to vote.
So I'm not.
So you should vote for the one you don't want so that
But
you
I
don't
can-
miss the one you really want.
If something comes up in the next week on Stages of Life, I can throw it in. Usually.
I would recommend, if you go to Thursday's meetup, there is a great piece by Carl Jung on it.
Yeah, I've read that before, actually. Yeah, I think I can't make that one either, but sadly, I can make the following Jung, I think,
Okay,
but not that one.
sounds good.
So I'm tempted to vote for a really, really difficult one subject for next week because I'm not here. So
Don't get DLJ in this mode, okay? It's always the loss.
Oh, it's amusement for hours.
Yes,
And-
that's
I have a totally unrelated question. Are you gonna post video for yesterday's fairy tales one?
oh yeah. I'm
Yeah.
editing it. It was
Oh,
in-
perfect. No worries. I'm keeping an eye out because it was one I was going to go to, but I found myself at the beach
Oh,
and
yeah,
well,
Muriel,
beach one over Zoom.
she was amazing. She was amazing.
She was, I know, I was sad to miss it.
Yep.
So I was
I'll
like-
send you that, and I'll send you the first one that she did. I don't know whether you saw that
I
one.
may have seen the first one already, which is why I was looking to attend this one, but
Wonderful.
I
I'll do
got a
that.
better offer.
Okay.
Sorry. Well, no, yours are recorded. So I'm like, well, I can do both. All right. Well, folks, now we're devolving here. Okay, so let's do stages of life next week. And that'll be fun. That'll be exciting. Hopefully, yeah, and what we're trying to do is get it posted for you along with the featured poem. And yeah, next week we slide into week 23.
Yes.
And just, again, if you did provide a personal poem, I've reached out to you, asked you if you're willing to share it with me. Let me know. I don't ever, if you don't, it just, no worries. I don't post it without your permission ever. And that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for sharing your Monday evening with me. Have a fantastic good night. Take care.